I was born in Beijing and grew up in Beijing, but my family come from Shanghai. My grandpa, all the family relatives are actually in Shanghai. I'm an economist, actually the macroeconomist. Today I will talk to you about the Chinese economy, what we understand the Chinese economy. But before that, listening to Doug, I keep thinking the telecom. I keep thinking when I start to use the telephone. Actually, my grandparent family in Shanghai, there was a telephone in the room. But in the Cultural Revolution, it's uninstalled. And then my family in Beijing didn't have a telephone until, I think, 1981, 82. And now everybody have a mobile phone. That's actually reflect a core issue, core understanding of Chinese economy. So first thing I would like to describe the Chinese economy is fast changing complex. In very short time, 30 years, it changed from very basic, low level economy without the basic modern materials and technologies now become kind of still not an advanced country. I will talk about this, but it's actually become a global player. And not only in the manufacturing industries, but also start to be a player in the technologies. But it's a big complex. You have Shanghai, you have these modern things, but you have very poor countryside. You have very highly educated elites, say, but you have Chinese literacy is quite high actually compared to other developing countries. We have 92-93 literacy ratio compared to India's 60 something. But there are still 70% of the labor force only got primary school education. And we got disparities between the regions. And we got disparities between the people. 70%, I said, low educated people, they earn less than, say, $1,050 per year. But at the same time, now we start have a middle class, and we start have luxury market and growing very fast. So, if we really want to understand China, keep in mind, very big complex. 1.4 billion population, vast territory, very different in different places, and fast changing modern ideas and traditions, different cultures, globalization, and the local traditions, all those kind of things mixed together. And all the economy, we are dealing with all these factors. This is number one I would like to remind you. And the second thing I would like to remind you is that although we are in Shanghai to have this kind of modern things, modern China Expo, we are very proud of it. But China is still a low-level developing country. Actually, our per capita GDP only still less than 4,000. Actually, 350 something, 3,500 US dollar per capita GDP. And a lot of things are actually related to this, low levels. And we see the problems China is dealing with, such as income disparities, which actually related to, the low level of development of industries and the service industries. There are still 30 to 35% of the labor force in the agricultural. Think what that percentage in Europe? 2%, 3%. Yesterday I talked to one of my Korean friend, and he said actually in terms of labor force in Korea only 4% something still doing the farming. So many backward things still there. It will take time. It will take time to reach the point, to reach the modern economy. And a lot of things, including the environmental problems, also related to this level of development. A lot of things happened here in China, actually happened maybe 200 years ago, 100 years ago in European cities, in European countries. So you have to have that kind of historical perspective when you think about China. You think when you have the observation of the problem of China, you think that this is a problem in the process of development. I just visited the Swedish pavilions before this conference. I saw the environment cleanup. So this is for Sweden. It's 40 years ago, 50 years ago. And a similar situation is here. A lot of the similar. That pictures, you picture from this angle and you go that angle. From that angle, that's China. And if we can get this done in 40 years, 30 years, I think that will be a great achievement. But of course, we should not repeat the similar problem by the developed countries. But you have to recognize it's difficult for the people in this stage to do all the good things developed country already done. This also including the social issues, social securities, healthcare, the disparities. It's also you cannot reach overnight, reach the level a lot of the developed country can do. And companies also, they are still at the low level. Some companies just start up in some traditional industries. They don't have very much technology, so they have their problems in early stage of development. So that's one thing if we really want to understand China, to think about history, to think about, to have a historical perspective of economic development. But then third point is that I do see big potentials for the Chinese economy, for the Chinese economic development. And that's I would emphasize for this. We already have 30 years high growth. A lot of people think, when will be the stop? And if 30 years high growth is very, I would say it's very unique. And even we don't have among 30 years, it's quite stable. Without the big fluctuations, upside downs, crisis, financial crisis, like many other countries experience in their early stage. So it's a great achievement. But I said, if we can do the right things, if we continue with the globalization, if we continue with the industrialization and the urbanization, there's huge potential in the future. Think about this. Recently, some people start to talk about the labor shortage in some places, like the coastline. But overall, as I said, if there is still 30 to 35% of labor force in the agricultural, you can think at least for next 10, 20 years, China may still have advantage, so-called the comparative advantage of low labor cost. For some coastline, of course, they got this low labor cost, and inflation had been there for 20 years, although not big inflations, but 3%, 4%. But their nominal wage for the laborers have not been changed because of the labor competition. Because of the labor market competition, people able to not increase the labor wages. Of course, you will have a shortage when other places start to grow and other places start to create more jobs. But basically, when you look forward, even this factor will not change very much for the next stage of development. Of course, that will be the challenge as well, because that means disparity may still stay with us. And we need to handle that. We need to provide basic social securities for the rural people, for the migrant workers, and to try to make more balanced growth. But I would say the potential for the development of industries are still there. And secondly, think about the urbanization. Now, only 47% of population live in the urban cities. That's the so-called urbanization ratio. And in the next, and at the moment, every year, this ratio increased by 1%. And in the next 20 years, there will be China's urbanization will reach the 70% of the population. And I mean, hundreds of millions of people will move into the city. And now China still already have quite a number of big cities, and we will see quite a great number, say 100, 200, 300. Small cities will grow up into big cities, more than 3 million, 4 million population. And in the coastline, we'll see a group of big cities, or networks of big cities will grow up. And how much demand for the infrastructures will create, and how much investment will be needed, and how the economy will be dynamic during this process. And then the consumption. Consumption now actually is a problem for China, because China now saves too much. We are working on that. How much we save? 52% of the GDP has been saved by the end, in the year of 2008. 2009, I would say similar, maybe even higher. The reason I don't have time to just talk about the reasons, but I give you the one point is that it's not because Chinese consumers, Chinese households would not like to spend. Chinese household saving rate has been quite stable in past 20 years, 30% over the household disposable income. The main contributor to the increase of the savings has been the corporate sector, because the profit really high, and there are some reasons, company can keep a lot of income without transfer it to the household sectors for various kind of reasons, including, for example, the state enterprise didn't pay so much dividend to the state budget. They paid the holding companies, but they didn't pay the state budget, so the revenue cannot transfer. But with this savings, of course, we have to work on that. We got to reform the system, change the policy, the regulatory framework. We can transfer more revenues to the household sectors, including to increase the spending on the social securities and the health care and educations, and make the household can consume more. But even given that, we already see, and we will see, the very strong growth of consumptions from the demand of the middle class. And actually this will become major increase of the global demand Well, if we include all the emerging market, China is one of it, a big one of it. And the typical phenomena actually has been last year's growth. Last year, although a lot of people say last year's high growth during the crisis, China's growth depended very much on the government spending and the investment in the infrastructures. But think about the consumption. Consumption grew by 16%. Car sales, automobile sales increased by 46% during the crisis. And tourism increased by 22%. This is typical middle class consumption, right? Although Chinese consumption is not very outstanding among the emerging markets, Brazilians consume more, Indians consume more than us, but we still see the high growth. And I believe with the further reform, further increase of the disposable income as a proportion of the total GDP, China's consumer market will grow dramatically in next stage. And also potential for Chinese companies. You know, in the world, a lot of people say the Chinese. I'm talking not only talking about mainly the Chinese national companies. A lot of people say Chinese company only can do the manufacturing, and only can make some copies of other technologies, can use of some other technologies, are not able to have much innovation. Yes, it basically is still the situation, except some large companies, some fast-growing companies. But think about it. Most of Chinese companies, particularly the private business, actually didn't exist before 1992. So basically their history is 15 years, 18 years. And in the first stage, of course, what they try to do is catching up. And the whole economy, in the early stage, you want to have innovation, you have to have education. You have to have system of technology research. But in the early stage, you invest in education, in technology facilities, but if you are still not yet at the frontier, you are still have some distance to the frontier. Even you make a big effort, you don't have much innovation. But one by one, group by group, industry by industries, Chinese companies and industries now moving, more close to the frontier. And we will see the next stage. Even though we have maybe some other factors for the high growth may disappear or become less important, but the innovations will start to play more roles. And more Chinese companies and the Chinese engineers will be able to do real innovations. So that's when I look at this title of our conference, I think we are backward still, but the dynamics actually is very encouraging. And we are lucky to come to the economic development in the modern age. And in this modern age, the technology progress really have a very speedy speed. And companies, people are really understand that you have to have education, you have to have technology, you have to focus on the innovation. So as a latecomer, we are still backward, but at the same time, I do see big potentials. And I believe that efforts for the education, for the technology, for the transfer of technology in the first stage will pay off in the next stage. So that's why I would say the big potentials. And also, as a latecomers, we can learn all the lessons, experience of lessons from other countries, including the positive experience but negative lessons such as financial crisis and other crises. We try to avoid the crisis, and we were working on that. So if Chinese economy can continue without interruptions of the crisis, and given all the factors, we don't have time to describe all the factors which are behind the high growth in the past 30 years, but most of them are still there, and some factors such as innovation may play bigger roles in the future. I do believe China has the opportunity to have another, say, 20 to 30 years of high growth. Not as high as 12%, 15%, we call the overheating, say 8%, 7%. It's still high growth. I really believe we have opportunity, we have a chance to have another 30 years, and we need it. We need this 30 years, 20 years, to get all the farmers to be relocated, and to get the poor paid migrant workers to be higher paid, and to have a more balanced structural economy, and to have a more dynamic company, and to have a balanced, more so-called harmonious society. Despite all the difficulties, despite all the challenges, and I think Chinese market will continue to grow, and Chinese development, that high growth story will last for a very long time. Maybe I stop here, and maybe we have a chance to answer some questions. Thank you very much for your attention.